Hello and welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, recognized among LinkedIn's 15 innovative influencers to follow. I'm also honored to be RevTech Strategist of 2024 and proudly listed as number 9 among 43 must-listen-to podcasts for every sales professional. Scale Your Sales podcast is your go-to resource for actionable insights and proven strategies, with aspirations to help revenue-focused leaders, CEOs, CROs, and sales leaders to achieve sustainable growth through customer excellence and elite sales team performance and operations. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast, my guest talks about middle of the funnel and how her entire life, without knowing the name of it, she has empowered and maximized middle of the funnel opportunities. She has unlocked the power of email and utilized the data from different resources and platforms within middle of the funnel to maximize the opportunities and the revenue growth opportunities. So stay tuned. It's an episode you won't want to miss. My next guest is a marketing powerhouse with over 20 years of experience shaking up B2B and B2B2C companies. As COO of Tegrita, a consultancy that unlocks the power of email, she is all about transforming processes and enhancing go-to-market strategies and ensuring smooth customer experiences. Named one of the top 50 women in MarTech and the co-author of CMO to CRO and the host of Revenue Rehab podcast, please welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, Brandi Starr.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful, and thank you for having me on your podcast, Revenue Rehab. It was such a great conversation. I thought we have got to continue with this. So it's a great pleasure.
Yes, I am excited. We had such a good discussion. I am glad we get to continue it with your audience now.
Absolutely. So the first thing I want to dig into, as the COO of Integra, is that right?
Did I do Tegrita.
Tegrita.
Yes.
Okay. As COO of Tegrita, you unlock the power of email. And I really wanted to dig into that because I saw a notice on the Gartner peer community. They often do research. I'm part of that. And it said that 56% of buyers prefer cold email as the first point of contact for, sales and marketing. And that is double for LinkedIn messages, and cold calls is only 14%. I wondered if you were surprised by those stats, because I know you unlocked the power of email.
Yeah, I was not surprised. Phone has become very intrusive. In a way that when your phone rings, there is this perceived sense of urgency of I have to address and deal with this right away. And so that, I love memes, and there's a meme that's like, talking about how way back in the day, we spent so much time coming up with like the perfect music for the ringtone. And the meme was like, if this little box, made any noise, I'd probably throw it across the room. And it is just a change in how people leverage our phones. And email is a dominant channel in terms of how we communicate with those we know. So within our organizations, email is very common, as well as chat. So Slacks, Microsoft Teams, all those sorts of things. LinkedIn inboxes, kind of has more of that vibe of a chat platform versus email, but that kind of communication where someone is able to reach out to, as long as it's meaningful, because anything that is, not useful, not relevant, nobody wants that in any format. But if it is meaningful, it is one of those channels that I can address and read and deal with when I'm ready. And it is just far less intrusive than like a cold phone call. So not at all surprised by that statistic.
Yeah, and it's interesting because email's been around for so long, and it kind of comes and goes in waves. So talk to me more about how you unlock its power.
Yeah, and I always joke and I say we're unlocking power. It's not that we have, discovered some secret pot of gold that doesn't exist. We have just really changed the way we think about email and the way that we leverage email. Because to your point, email has been around. At one point, it very much was a spray and pray channel, like people just spammed emails and hope something stick. We now can be smarter about that. But where we really unlock the potential is when you start to look at email in context of the rest of the funnel. And how can that actually be impactful and used in the right places? And so one example, if I think about like the whole channel through, we had a client that content syndication was their bread and butter in terms of top of funnel.
All of these platforms and opportunities have a lot of data connected with them. What's so unique about the email data and insights that you can get from it that's different to, say, LinkedIn platform and the communication, the chat that goes on there? Because it seems to be, it's more instant, isn't it?
Yes. So it's not only that it's more instant, but email on the marketing side. So generally on the sales side, the CRM is the main tool. On the marketing side, the marketing automation platform is the main tool. And almost all companies have those two integrated. When you think about all those other channels, so your LinkedIn, your paid media, your content syndication, all of those things are generally aiming to capture the person's information so that they become a part of your owned audience. And that's going to come into the email tool. And so those things are all, and it's a technological conversation in that all the data from these other tools are being fed into the email system. And if your marketing automation platform is set up well, you're going to be able to connect that data. And that is where you get greater insights. Because in my opinion, looking at any one channel by itself and that data is not, it's giving you information, but not insight. So we can see what's happening in LinkedIn. We've got some information. There's some data there that we can use to figure out how to be better on LinkedIn. We can look at our content syndication metrics to figure out how to be better on content syndication. But when we're looking at those channels isolated, we just have a lot of information. And that's where email becomes that connector of data and information. And because it sits in the middle, it's touching all the other channels. And so that's where we're able to more easily put some context behind what's actually happening.
I think it's really interesting that often people talk about the top of the funnel or the bottom of the funnel, but miss out the middle of the funnel. And this seems to be your kind of area of expertise. And I can feel your real passion for it as well, and excitement that other companies seem to be missing key opportunities here. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yes. And it's funny because it's interesting because sometimes you do a thing, but you don't necessarily have a term for it. And when I look back, my entire career has actually been focused on the middle of the funnel. I didn't know that as a term. It literally has been within the last year that I've had the aha of like being able to categorize everything that I've been passionate about in marketing for 24 years now, has been the middle of the funnel, even though I haven't always called it that. But it is, and this is when you have a decision sale. So we're not talking about somebody buying a pair of jeans, although there is a middle of the funnel there, it's a less thought process. But when organizations are buying something that's 10, 20, 30, $100,000 or more, there's a decision sale there. There is something that happens that makes them start thinking about making a change, not even necessarily making a purchase, but making a change. And then there's a whole process of them figuring out what are their options, evaluating it, etc. So there's a lot that happens in that middle, from that awareness of we got to figure this out to I know what I want to buy. Let's go through contracting and, cross our T's, dot our I's. There's a whole lot that happens in there. And it's not the sexy stuff. Like, emails, not sexy. It's not the thing, it's not the hot topic. And so people don't, and it's also hard. Like email itself is not hard, but orchestrating the middle of the funnel in a meaningful, insightful way is actually hard. You got to have the technology, you got to make it work. You got to have process and conversations and who does what. We've got to have, strategy about thinking about the whole and not have the silos of I do this thing, I do that thing. And so, yes, when I see organizations get the middle of the funnel right, those are the organizations that have more predictable revenue, because I don't think revenue is ever 100% predictable, but we can get to a point where it is more predictable and more consistent. And, companies are not having these knee-jerk reactions of, oh crap, pipeline's down, do something, and it's always like bad decisions that you make in those moments. And so that is why I'm so passionate about all those unsexy things that need to happen in the middle that really makes the whole truly amazing.
Yeah. I your passion's coming really really through. It's like, well, yeah, it's a bit like this. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm convinced.
Yes, I am. That is like my crusade, is to get everyone to focus on the middle of the funnel. Like, it is so important to do the things that are less fun, less sexy, but allow everything else to work so much better. So yeah, I'm going to be out there with the picket sign.
Yeah, exactly. Get it tattooed on your head.
Yes.
And do you think the reason why people miss out on the opportunity of, really gaining the insights from the middle of the funnel is because it has to be so well connected? We come from an environment where it was all very siloed. We now talk about, the alignment of sales, marketing, customer success. But many companies are still just paying lip service to it and not really reaching the benefits. So almost like the first stage is alignment of those things, but actually to really, really excel middle of the funnel, then it has to be all interconnected.
Yeah. And, we always take the approach of thinking about like, what's the path of least resistance? Because getting all of these things right, getting the buy-in for all of the things, it can be difficult. Like, I'm not naive to the ins and outs and challenges of larger organizations. And so where we always look at is first, let's just talk about the technology. Getting technology integrated and getting data flowing, usually easy to get buy-in to prioritize that, and they can be done in small chunks. How do we get our paid media data flowing into our marketing automation platform better? Like, that's not a 6-month project. It doesn't require, executive buy-in. Like, these are things that are really small projects that a marketing ops, rev ops team can easily tackle that move you in the right direction. Because if we get the data and the technology working together, then those teams have a little bit more insight that they can start to interject into reporting and into conversations. And that's what I mean by path of least resistance. Like when, going back to the example I gave of content syndication, when we gave that information to our client and they had that conversation with their executive team, it was like, oh, we were about to make a bad mistake. We didn't have this other information. We now need to start looking at things this way so that we have a complete picture. And then it's how do we do more of that? And then it's okay, well, now we need to think about this. How do we get the sales tools better integrated? Or how do we clean up our sales force, or get our sales team to track their opportunities better? Or, it becomes this more organic conversation where people want more of that good thing when you give it to them. And so that is where, and just total shameless plug for Tegrita, that's where we come in quite often, is starting with organizations, getting that technology in order, doing those small projects, figuring out how to clean up the data, how to get more meaning out of the data, so that companies can bite things off, what do they say, eat the frog, or there's some analogy there, but so that you can take it in small pieces without having to go and say, we want to do this whole transformational thing to transform our middle of the funnel. I would love if an organization would want to take on the whole, but that's not the reality of what works. So we got to kind of start with what can we control, and the data and the tech is usually the starting point that is the low-hanging fruit, to use a buzzword.
Yeah, yeah. So you were co-author of the book CMO to CRO. So tell me more about that premise and how that kind of fits with the work you're doing.
Yeah, and honestly, the premise of the book is exactly what I just explained. And it is that, the book started off as a joke where we were talking about how collectively across the three of us, we have seen so many problems that face the revenue and go-to-market teams, and we've seen how to fix them in pieces, but we had not seen a company tackle the whole. And so we were like, oh, we could totally write a book. And it was like, ha ha ha, who's going to have time for that? And somehow we made time. And the premise really is that the face of revenue is changing. And we believe in that revolution that the CMO, so the person heading marketing, is best positioned to lead what revenue is going to look like in the future. And at the time that we wrote the book, this concept of having a single revenue leader was still very controversial. And it's a lot like we're seeing now 3 or 4 years later that there are a lot more companies doing this, but it is taking the path of least resistance and doing exactly what I just talked about, in starting with the technology and lining up behind the tech and letting the tech be the thing that opens the door to you starting to change the face of revenue. And then moving forward, we start to break down some of the silos, making sure that our goals and measures are aligned, because we've seen so many companies where marketing's incented for one thing and sales is incented for something completely different. And that completely breaks down. I mean, I can remember when I was still in an individual contributor role, generating all these leads that were high quality, and then sales didn't touch them. And I finally had a sales guy go, yeah, we're barely comped on that. And so he's like, we worked the ones that we saw this as a door opener for the bigger sale. But if that wasn't there, he was like, we don't make any money on this. And I'm like, well, why is my whole job and bonus based on me generating leads for something sales doesn't want to sell? Like, that makes no sense, because we just wasted a ton of marketing budget. And so we talk about moving in that direction of where goals are aligned so that we're all working towards one goal, on moving into where we have a unified revenue or go-to-market team where you have marketing, sales, success, all under one leader who is setting the direction. And so that's really the premise of the book. And although we didn't call it middle of the funnel then, because like I said, we really just honed in on like, this is the right term, but we are talking about the same concepts of bringing everything together, really looking at revenue as a cohesive unit and focusing on the customer as the way forward for, businesses to actually be successful.
I think this is really interesting that you've said a few times that the starting point is leading with the technology. And that it seems kind of counterintuitive, really. So, you have the technology, system and processes and the people, but the people can completely mess up the technology. And, we've got this whole industry that popped out with revenue enablement. And I know that, it's kind of going through its challenges and changes is now, but it feels technology leading the charge. I'm interested in to explore that further.
And here's why I believe that. Because there are companies that have no technology and they've got some big gaps that they need to fill in. That will set them aside. If we look at most companies today, most organizations at least have the key components in their tech stack that they need. Not to say there's not gaps, not to say it couldn't be better, but they at least have stuff. And so from my perspective, I am not one of those people who believes in rip and replace, because so often we're blaming the tech and that's not the problem. I also don't feel like the answer is always buy more tech, as much as I love getting new tech. And where I say you line up behind the tech is when I'm working with clients, I'm like, okay, what do we have? Like, whether you love it or hate it, we have it. Let's figure out, how do we do the best with what we have? And when you lean into the technology, it actually enables the strategy. Like for marketing automation, we have a lot of customers that are on Eloqua, so I'll use that as an example. If I'm talking to a client, their demand gen team so often doesn't even know the capabilities of the marketing automation platform. So the team that's creating the strategy, creating the campaigns, creating the messaging doesn't even know what the technology can do, which means they're not getting the most out of that technology. And this is where I say we line up behind the tech. And I'll say, okay, you have Eloqua, you have Marketo, you have HubSpot, you have whatever you have. Here's what we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about our strategy. And educating those people on, here's what you have. And guess what? If we integrate these two things, here's what you can do now. And just by adding this little UTMs or, whatever on the front end, we can do all these things. And this is why I say line up behind the technology, because the technology gives us capabilities to be able to do things better, smarter, faster, more personalized, that if we don't know we have, we're not tapping into. And so I look at, how do we get your tech stack working for you, working well? That's first step. Like, that's table stakes, is you got stuff, let's use it well. After we've got that going, that's where we can start to evaluate, like, do we need to fill a gap in the tech? Do we need to replace something? Do we need to whatever? Like, we can have that conversation, because sometimes people do have the wrong thing. But I don't like to start there, because then that becomes a whole project of, when is our contracting and selection? And, that becomes a whole big thing. And if you can't tell, I am consistently looking for path of least resistance. How do we move forward, make incremental but significant steps forward as quickly as possible? And by looking at what you actually have is usually the fastest way to do that. Because in general, I've seen people with best-in-class technologies across the board, and it's the example of, like, you got a Lamborghini, but you're driving it like a bicycle. And so it's like, we got to start there. So yeah, it is a bit of an odd thought process to think about leading with the technology, but the capabilities that you have really open up your opportunities in terms of your strategy and how you can be more cohesive.
Okay, Brandi, I'm going to challenge this a little.
Okay.
So you gave an example where you had, you're in marketing, providing great leads, but then sales wasn't taking it up because they didn't make any money from it. Had nothing to do with the technology. It was about the strategy not being aligned. And we know so many organizations have an abundance of technology that they don't know what to do with. And without the strategy, without the real focus on the customers, we can make use of the best technology. But why are we doing it? What are we trying to do? What is the kind of revenue goal? How can we, ensure that we create customers out of our partners? What do our customers want? How does that inform us as to the direction we're going in, the technology we need? I talk a lot about, and in the talent teams that we often have the wrong people in the wrong position using the wrong tools. But when you start with the technology leading the decision making, as opposed to the strategy and the capabilities, if we're not stripping out all of the technology, we're not stripping out all of the people, we need to actually find what is the best use of what we've got in the right positions and the right tools. And why are we doing this? Why are we here? It's for our customers. We're here for our customers. So I'm challenging it because my view is that customers always lead. The data from our customers and our strategy leads our decision making. And then it's easier to decide on the technology and the right people in the right position and align us. So that's my perspective.
So I actually agree. And I want to just offer one point of clarification. It's not that I believe the technology is going to drive the decisions. The customer always has to be number one. And how the technology is going to enable our strategy. So when here's what we have, here's all the capabilities that we have. The piece that I think that you hit on that is really important is the goals have to also be aligned in terms of the incentives. And that is a much bigger and different conversation, because it's not even the strategy that I think that's misaligned. In my example, it truly was the goals. People are going to do what they are incented to do. We all have jobs to make money. Yes, the goal is that you're passionate and do something that you love. But at the end of the day, we work because we need to make money. And so what you are incenting people to do is what they're going to focus on. And so that to me becomes a leadership HR conversation in how are we making sure that the goals of each person and each role are aligned in a way that work together, not against each other. Because literally in that scenario, me and that salesperson were bonused, like we were comped on conflicting things. And so it was never going to be beneficial to the business, because if I did what I needed to do to hit bonus and he did what he needed it to do to get commission, those two things were never going to align. And that's where it was like the company was shooting themselves in the foot, which is a little bit different of a challenge that not everyone is in the position to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you say about hiring a talent and the potential rather than based on their potential rather than their experience. And talent, I think, is key to this story, and having the right people in the right place that I kind of talk a lot about. So I'd like to just kind of investigate this a little bit further before we wrap up. So how do you go about identifying that you do have the right people in the right positions, you have the right talent in order to achieve the goals?
Yeah, we have taken a very different approach in that we hire for talent as opposed to experience. And not to say that we don't look for some experience, but looking at resumes, we don't even look at resumes until the third step in our process, because there are people who fall into careers circumstantially that are not what they are best suited for, and they get to a point that they realize that and start trying to make a shift. When companies filter out based on resumes alone, you're missing that. And not to say that experience doesn't play a role, because it does. But when we lead with looking for what are the actual talents of the job, like what is what is going to make one person successful, whereas the other not, and those things that are naturally in the person. And, I'm not at all the HR person to fully understand all of the nuances of talent, but what holistically we have done as an organization is really find people who are naturally gifted at the talents of the job and give them an opportunity. Even if their resume or their education doesn't fully align, I mean, we have to bring them in at the right level. We've got different levels and we figure that out. But by doing that, we have increased job satisfaction. We have, a team of very high performers, and we have very low turnover.
And, I would absolutely agree with you in that there is natural talent. But the problem is in our industry, I think, is it's how do we identify that? Because there's so much bias involved in recruitment. And there is a process that I have access to and use where it's an assessment. So you wouldn't look at resumes. You're absolutely right. There's only 20% effective predictiveness of these CVs. So it's quite a crude method. And when we use interviews, again, it's only 20%. There's so much bias involved. So, like if you assess somebody, a sales-specific assessment that's able to identify the intrinsic measures of success, because you can train anybody to sell or to do a particular job. They're not necessarily good at it. What makes them good are those intrinsic qualities. It's mindset, it's it's drive, it's their view on money. Can they talk about money? Are they comfortable talking about money? What limiting beliefs do they have? These are the intrinsic qualities that you can't, a CV and a resume will not be able to identify. So this is something that we help our revenue generators and leaders and CEOs with, to understand that it's such a key role that you've absolutely got to get it right. And so, there is a way of having a much clearer crystal ball into the intrinsic qualities of the talent that you're hiring or developing in your organization.
Yeah, and we use something similar for each of the roles that we have. It is our assessments are created by a third-party consultant specific to each role, so that we are assessing the examples you gave are specific to sales. When we've got someone in, client engagement or, whatever, it's like those things are like, what are those natural talents? So
Yeah.
I highly recommend it for all types of organizations. You will open yourself up so much. It does help to remove bias in there. It helps to get more diversity because you are not doing things that naturally exclude diversity. And you just have, it is such a beautiful thing to have consistently high performing teams. And I didn't think it was possible until I experienced it. And it is just, it's crazy when you have everyone who is just uniquely talented at what they do, how much more you can accomplish as an organization.
You're absolutely right. It's absolutely beautiful. It's great when you have the predictive measure verified and predictive that this person's going to be successful in your role, in your company, with your market. And also out of that assessment to be able to create the coaching notes so your manager knows what to say to turn that person on, to make sure that they are in the top quartile, so they're guaranteed to be in the top quartile and be successful for your organization. It just seems crazy that more organizations are not using these tools, which is why I'm on a mission to make sure more organizations do. It's crazy not like having access to, being data-informed decisions, not only about the people, but also about your processes as well, that we've talked about. All
Yeah.
right, I wanted to just switch it up a little and ask you about your values really, and which of your values do you think lends themselves most to your success, your current success?
It's such a buzzword, but authenticity, and not being afraid to just be my whole self. And as a Black woman, that has always been hard. I can remember very early in my career, my mom saw me leaving for an interview, and I had on, traditional black suit, because that was when everybody still was in suits, but I had on red stiletto pumps with my black suit, and I had a tongue ring, and I did not take it out. And she was just like, "Ah, what are you doing? Like, you can't wear 5-inch red stilettos to an interview, and you gotta take that tongue ring out." And she was like, "You're never gonna get a job." And it was one of those things that I was like, if these shoes and this tongue ring are the reason they don't hire me, I don't want to work there. And it really has been having the comfort and confidence to show up in spaces as my whole self. I'm good for, I'll have short blonde hair today, and you'll see me by the end of the day, and it might be long and red. And there are some people that are like, "Oh, like you can't throw them off like that." I'm like, "Yes, I can." And, I have long pointy nails, and, and I am using physical outward things because they are things that aren't always as accepted or haven't always been. But even just in how I talk, what I care about, all of those things, I have never in my career, and I mean, even thinking back to my very first job at Jerry's Subs and Pizza at 14 and a half, telling the owner that I was not going to mop because that's not something I do. And he was like, "But that's your job." I was like, "Well, let me tell you a better use of my time. Like, let me talk." And so I was doing marketing for him at 14. And it was one of those like things where people are like, "Did you really just tell this grown man you were not gonna mop because that's not your thing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because he can use me better." Like, those are things that, like, that level of authenticity of just being comfortable in my own skin has been a huge success factor for me. And it also has been really impactful for me as a leader, because over the years, I have had other people, especially women, but not just women, who have said the fact that they can tell that I'm just comfortable showing up as me has given them space to feel just a little more comfortable in showing up as themselves. And always, because I'm always like, my work is going to stand for itself. If you want to, have an issue with me for these other superficial things, like, your problem, not mine. Greater success because I have just had that confidence to be comfortable in my own skin and comfortable being my whole self at work. And so that is one of those things that I really value, is creating spaces where people can feel comfortable being their authentic selves and not feeling like they have to put on a mask or hide behind what's acceptable, whatever that is for them.
Excellent, excellent. So how can listeners get hold of you, Brandi?
So 2 ways. I am always on LinkedIn. So Brandi Starr, I'm pretty easy to find. You'll see my smiling face. And then also Tegrita.com, Tegrita.com. I write a good bit of our content, as well as our weekly podcast, Revenue Rehab. So shameless plug for our email list, because you will get lots and lots of my brain comes out in all of our content. That's a huge part of my role. So yeah, definitely let me know if you connect on LinkedIn that you heard me here. Otherwise, I would definitely love to continue to stay connected with your audience.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge. I look forward to more.
Thank you for having me. I have definitely enjoyed.